The dust of FOB Nightingale tasted of iron and regret. It coated the tongue, gritted in the teeth, and settled in a fine red film over every surface, from the razor wire coiled on the HESCO barriers to the weary shoulders of the soldiers who manned them. Heat shimmered off the packed earth, distorting the horizon into a wavering, malevolent line. Into this purgatory of waiting and reacting stepped a woman who seemed entirely out of place. She was not young, but age had not softened her. It had distilled her. Her fatigues were clean, devoid of the stains and patched tears that mark the uniforms of the resident infantry company. They were also stripped of all insignia. No name, no rank, no unit patch. Nothing. She carried no weapon, only a graphite black data slate clutched in one hand like a prayer book. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, practical knot, and her eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed nothing. They swept over the sprawling camp, cataloging the slumped posture of the guards, the jury-rigged sunshades, the faint but persistent smell of diesel exhaust and stale sweat. The Osprey that had deposited her on the landing pad was already a dwindling speck, its rotor wash a final, fading sigh against the oppressive silence. A young private, barely out of his teens, jogged up, his rifle held awkwardly. "Ma'am, you the, specialist?" She gave a single, short nod. "Vance, I'm here to see Colonel Thorne." "Right, the CO's in the talk." He gestured vaguely toward a large, sand-colored tent bristling with antennae. "This way." He led her through the camp's main artery. Soldiers paused in their work, cleaning weapons or reinforcing sandbags, to watch her pass. Their gazes were a mixture of curiosity and immediate, ingrained skepticism. She was an anomaly. She didn't fit. She wasn't a mud-caked grunt, a swaggering pilot, or a harried medic. She was other, an administrative ghost in a place built on the brutal physics of ballistics and high explosives. As they neared the Tactical Operations Center, a figure detached himself from a group of non-commissioned officers. He was built like a battering ram, thick neck, broad shoulders, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. The chevrons on his sleeve identified him as a master sergeant. His eyes, small and hard, raked over her. "Lost, ma'am?" His voice was a low rumble, laced with a casual, practiced condescension. The "ma'am" was an insult, a verbal pat on the head for a civilian who had wandered into the men's world. "The finance clerks are in the Connex box by the motor pool, if you're here to fix our pay." A few of the younger soldiers with him snickered. The private, leading her, flushed and looked at the ground. Vance stopped. She didn't turn her full body toward the sergeant, merely her head. Her gaze was flat, analytical, as if she were examining a piece of faulty equipment. "I'm not lost." The sergeant's smirk widened. He took a step closer, crowding her. Space. His name tape read Kalen. "Right, then who are you?" He gestured with a thumb toward the toss. "Because the colonel's busy running a war. He doesn't have time for tourists." "I have an appointment," she said, her voice even and impossibly calm. It held no anger, no defensiveness. It was a statement of fact, as unadorned and solid as a rock. The lack of emotional reaction seemed to bother Kalen more than any retort would have. He grunted, a sound of dismissal. "Whatever you say." He turned back to his men, his message clear. "She is nothing. She is not one of us." The private scurried ahead, pushing open the heavy canvas flap of the talk. "She's here, sir, the specialist." Vance stepped from the blinding sun into the cool, blue-lit gloom of the command tent. The air inside was thick with the hum of electronics and the low murmur of radio traffic. A massive, holographic map table dominated the center of the space, displaying a topographical rendering of the surrounding AO, dotted with friendly blue icons and suspected enemy red ones. A man stood before it, his back to the entrance. He was tall and lean, his posture rigid with tension. The silver eagle on his collar glinted in the low light. Colonel Aris Thorne. He didn't turn around. His eyes remained fixed on a deep, winding valley on the map designated Sector Gamma. "Report," he commanded, his voice tight. "Sir, the specialist is here. Vance," the private squeaked. Thorne finally turned, his expression a mask of strained patience. He was a man running on caffeine and sheer willpower, and he had no time for distractions. His eyes swept over Vance, taking in the clean uniform, the missing rank, the data slate. His frown deepened. "You're the asset from command?" he asked, disbelief coloring his tone. "I requested a JTAC team and an EW bird. They sent me an analyst." "My designation is Specialist Vance," she stated, her tone unchanging. "A specialist in what? Filling out paperwork?" Master Sergeant Kalen had followed her in, positioning himself near the colonel's shoulder like a loyal hound. His presence filled the tent, amplifying the atmosphere of skepticism. "Sir, with all due respect, we're about to send a critical resupply convoy through the Serpent's Coil. We need trigger pullers and eyes in the sky, not another number cruncher to tell us the odds are bad. We already know the odds are bad." Thorne ran a hand over his face, the gesture weary and frustrated. "Command's wisdom is inscrutable sometimes. What, exactly, is your function here, Specialist?" "I'm here to audit the integrity of your C4I systems," Vance replied, her gaze moving from the colonel to the holographic map. "Specifically, the telemetry relays from the QS-19 drone network and the encrypted comms protocols." Thorne and Kalen exchanged a look. It was a look of shared exasperation, the weary glance of frontline operators dealing with the bureaucratic nonsense of the rear echelon. To them, she was speaking a foreign language, one of a technical minutia that had no bearing on the immediate, visceral reality of a potential ambush. "Our comms are fine," Kalen said flatly. "They're standard-issue mil-spec. They work, or they don't. We don't need an audit to tell us that." "The convoy, call sign Packhorse, is set to roll out at 1400 hours," Thorne said, his attention already returning to the map, dismissing her. "They'll be relying on the drone overwatch from Sentinels 1 through 5. Your audit," he said the word with palpable disdain, "will have to wait. We have an operation in progress. Find a corner in the signals tent and stay out of the way. Kalen, show her." It wasn't a request. It was an exile. She was being sent to the corner, put on a timeout like a misbehaving child, while the adults handled the important work. Kalen gave a sharp, mocking nod. "Yes, sir." He turned to Vance, his expression triumphant. "This way, Specialist." He led her out of the talk and across the compound to a smaller, cramped tent that housed the FOB's communication hub. Inside, 2 junior technicians, a corporal named Chen and a PFC named Diaz, were monitoring a bank of screens displaying drone feeds and network status indicators. The air was stale and smelled of hot plastic. "Find a spot," Kalen grunted, waving a hand at the cluttered space. "Don't touch anything essential. Chen, Diaz, this is Specialist Vance. She's here from on high to observe." He let the word hang in the air, weighted with ridicule. The 2 technicians glanced at her, their expressions mirroring Kalen's skepticism, then quickly looked back at their screens. Vance ignored them all. She found an unused diagnostic console in the far corner, a small, forgotten station covered in a thin layer of dust. She pulled up a folding chair, set down her data slate, and connected it to the console with a thin fiber optic cable. The screen flickered to life, reflecting in her calm, unreadable eyes. Kalen watched her for a moment longer, a final look of contempt on his face before turning and leaving the tent. The message was clear. She was irrelevant, a box to be checked for some distant, out-of-touch general. The real work, the real danger, was happening elsewhere, and she had no part in it. She was just a ghost in the machine, and no one even cared to know which machine she haunted. The hours bled into one another, measured by the shifting angle of the sun and the rising intensity in the talk. Vance remained in her corner, a silent fixture in the humming signals tent. Her fingers moved across the surface of her slate, not with the hesitant pecking of an administrator, but with the fluid, economical grace of a master musician. Lines of code scrolled across her screen, data packets rendered as complex, flowing charts. Chen and Diaz occasionally glanced over, their curiosity piqued by the sheer speed of her work, but they quickly dismissed it. She was probably just running pointless diagnostics, generating reports no one would ever read. At 13:55, the convoy, pack horse, rolled out. The rumbling of the heavy cargo trucks and their MRAP escorts was a physical presence that vibrated through the floor of the tent. On the main monitor wall, 5 video feeds blinked to life, showing the convoy from the high-altitude perspective of the QS-19 Sentinel drones. Colonel Thorne's voice crackled over the tent's internal comms, sharp and clear. "All stations, this is Nightingale Actual. Packhorse is en route. Sentinel flight, confirm visual." "Sentinel-1, solid visual," a pilot's voice responded. The other 4 drones checked in, their feeds stable, showing the column of vehicles kicking up a plume of red dust as it entered the narrow mouth of Sector Gamma. Kalen stood beside the colonel in the talk, his arms crossed, his eyes glued to the drone feeds. For the first hour, everything was nominal. The convoy made steady progress. The tension in the talk began to ease, replaced by a monotonous sense of routine. Vance, however, felt no such ease. On her screen, she wasn't watching the video feeds. She was monitoring the raw data stream that underpinned them, and she saw a ghost. A faint, almost imperceptible flicker in the telemetry handshake between Sentinel-3 and the ground station. It lasted less than a microsecond, too fast for any standard diagnostic to flag. It looked like a simple data collision, a random bit of atmospheric noise, but it wasn't random. It was precise. It was surgical. She watched, her posture unchanged, her expression placid. 10 minutes later, it happened again, this time on Sentinel-4's uplink. A single corrupted packet, a digital whisper in the storm of data. "Corporal Chen," she said, her voice cutting through the low hum of the tent. Chen looked over, annoyed at the interruption. "What?" "Run a deep-level diagnostic on the Sentinel-4 uplink protocol. Check for packet injection." Chen scoffed. "Packet what?" "Ma'am, the light's green. The feed is fine. It's probably just solar flares." "It is not solar flares," Vance said, her voice losing none of its calm but gaining a distinct edge of authority. "Run the diagnostic." "Master Sergeant Coylan said not to run any non-essential processes during the op," Chen retorted, turning back to his screen. "It could bog down the network." Before Vance could respond, the crisis she had foreseen began to unfold. On the main wall, the feed from Sentinel-4 flickered violently. For a second, the image of the convoy was replaced by a cascade of digital snow. Then, it went black. An icon on the status board turned from green to red. "Nightingale, this is Sentinel-4. The drone operator's voice crackled, laced with confusion. "I've lost my video link. Trying to re-establish." Kalen's voice boomed over the comms from the talk. "What's going on, Signals? Get that feedback up." "Just a glitch, Sergeant," Diaz called back, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Probably a faulty transmitter on the bird." Then Sentinel-3 went dark. No flicker, no warning, just gone. A second red icon bloomed on the board. Panic began to curdle the air in the talk. "What the hell is happening?" Thorne demanded. Sentinel-1, 2, 5, what is your status? Sentinel-1, still have visual, but my controls are sluggish, a pilot reported, his voice tight with alarm. Something's interfering. Vance stood up. She walked calmly to Chen's station. "Get up," she said. It wasn't a request. Chen stared at her dumbfounded. "What? Who do you think you are?" "She's right," Diaz suddenly yelled from his console. "I'm seeing massive signal degradation across the entire network. It's not equipment failure. We're being jammed." As he spoke, the feeds from Sentinels 1 and 5 dissolved into static. Blackness. 4 of the 5 drones were now blind. Only Sentinel-2 remained, its image wavering, distorted. "Packhorse Actual, this is Nightingale." Kalen was shouting into his headset. "What's your status? Talk to me." The reply was a burst of static, punctuated by the faint, terrifying sound of automatic weapons fire. "Tact ambush, heavy." The voice cut out, replaced by a high-pitched squeal. The talk was descending into chaos. The holographic map, once their all-seeing eye, was now a useless, blind guess. The blue icons representing the convoy were frozen in place, deep inside the valley of Sector Gamma, surrounded by unseen enemies. Colonel Thorne slammed his fist on the map table. "Damn it! Get me air support! Get me artillery! Somebody get me eyes on my people!" The operators were frantic, but their systems were failing them. The enemy wasn't just attacking the convoy with bullets and explosives. They were waging a war in the electromagnetic spectrum, and they were winning. They had systematically blinded the FOB, severing its connection to its soldiers in their most vulnerable moment. The protocols, the hardware, the training, it had all collapsed in a matter of minutes. The men in charge, so confident in their technology and their procedures, were now helpless, shouting into dead channels, staring at blank screens. While the command structure fractured around her, Vance moved with a chilling, deliberate purpose. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for orders. She shoved the stunned Corporal Chen aside from his console and sat down, her hands a blur, as she jacked her personal data slate directly into the mainframe's core access port. "Hey, you can't do that," Chen stammered, reaching for her shoulder. "That's a restricted, 'Don't touch me,'" Vance said without looking at him. Her voice was low, but it carried the cold, absolute weight of command. Chen froze, his hand hovering in the air. Kalen's roar echoed from the talk. "Signals, what is your status? I want my network back online now." Vance ignored the shouting. She ignored the panic. The world outside her console ceased to exist. Her mind was already deep inside the system's architecture, moving through firewalls and encrypted gateways like a wraith. The standard user interface was gone, replaced on her screen by a sheer black field where rivers of green and amber code flowed and branched. She wasn't using the system. She was speaking its native language. "What is she doing?" Diaz whispered, staring in awe at the raw data streaming across her monitor. That's kernel-level access. You need director-level clearance for that." The enemy's electronic warfare suite was a thing of brutal elegance. It wasn't just jamming, it was a sophisticated, multi-layered assault. It had inserted viral code that mimicked system errors, spoofed drone handshakes to create phantom signals, and was now actively hunting for any outbound communication to triangulate the FOB's position for a mortar strike. It was a digital cage, and its walls were closing in. Vance met the assault head-on. Her fingers danced across the console's keyboard, each keystroke a precise, calculated blow. She identified the primary jamming frequency, a brute force carrier wave designed to overwhelm their comms. Instead of trying to punch through it, she sidestepped it entirely. She dove into the subharmonics, the ghost frequencies in the static, searching for a flaw. A digital demon, a piece of the enemy's malware, detected her presence. It lunged, attempting to trigger a system-wide shutdown. On her screen, a block of angry red code bloomed. Vance didn't flinch. She isolated the malicious code in a virtual sandbox in milliseconds, rerouted its shutdown command into a harmless, looping diagnostic, and dismantled it line by line. It was like watching a bomb disposal expert disarm a nuclear device with a pair of tweezers. Kalen stormed into the signals tent, his face purple with rage. "I gave you an order. I want a sitrep, not a whatever the hell this is." He saw Vance at the main console and his fury focused. "You, get away from there. That's an order specialist." He reached for her, to physically haul her out of the chair. Vance's left hand shot out, not to strike him, but to tap a single key on the board. The main monitor wall, previously black, flashed to life. It didn't show a video feed. It showed a real-time schematic of the electromagnetic spectrum over Sector Gamma. It was a chaotic storm of red, representing the enemy's jamming field. But in the center of it, a single, impossibly thin thread of blue pulsed faintly. "Sentinel-2," Vance said, her eyes never leaving her work. "The enemy thinks it's disabled. They severed the command link, but they failed to terminate the emergency telemetry beacon." Everyone in the tent stared at the screen. The blue thread was almost invisible, a whisper in a hurricane. "It's not transmitting video or audio," Diaz said, his voice hushed. "It's just raw data. Altitude, airspeed, temperature. It's useless." "It is not useless," Vance countered. "It's transmitting its orientation. It's gyroscopic data. It's tumbling as it falls, and with every tumble its antenna points in a different direction." She typed a complex algorithm. The screen changed, the raw numbers from the falling drone beginning to resolve into patterns. "The enemy jamming field is not uniform. It has gaps, micro-gaps, lasting only a fraction of a second. When the drone's antenna aligns with one of those gaps, I get a clean signal." She was pulling needles of information out of a haystack of static. She began to piece together the fragments, thousands of tiny data packets, assembling them into a coherent picture. A three-dimensional model of the valley began to form on the screen, built not from light, but from radio waves. "I have them," she whispered. Her voice, calm and steady, cut through the tension. She began to call out coordinates, her tone that of a seasoned forward observer. "Enemy mortar position, crest of the eastern ridge, grid 477931, 2 tubes." In the talk, the artillery officer, who had been staring helplessly at his map, looked up in shock. "Confirm source." "Source is confirmed." Vance's voice came over the comms, piped in by a stunned Diaz. "Heavy machine gun emplacement, dug in at the valley choke point. Grid 475929. They have pack horse pinned in a crossfire." Colonel Thorne stared at the speaker, then at Kalen, his face a mixture of disbelief and dawning hope. "Fire," he commanded the artillery officer. "Fire on those coordinates." The ground outside shook as the FOB's M777 howitzers unleashed a salvo. Seconds later, the distant, crumping sound of explosions echoed back from the valley. On Vance's screen, a portion of the red jamming field flickered and died. "Mortars neutralized," she reported, her voice devoid of emotion. "The enemy is repositioning. They're moving a squad to flank Packhorse from the south." She rattled off another set of coordinates. Again, the big guns roared. Kalen stood frozen in the doorway of the signals tent, his anger forgotten, replaced by a profound, earth-shattering confusion. He was watching a miracle. This woman, this specialist he had dismissed as a paper pusher, was seeing the invisible. She was fighting a battle he couldn't comprehend, using weapons he didn't know existed, and she was winning. Vance's work intensified. She isolated the enemy's own command frequency, a tightly encrypted channel they used to coordinate their attack. She didn't have the key to decrypt it, but she didn't need it. She programmed a feedback loop, a viral pulse that would ride their own signal back to its source. "Colonel," she said, her voice now resonating with an authority that dwarfed everyone in the room. "The enemy EW vehicle is located at grid 476935. It's a converted truck, lightly armored. They are the nexus of this attack. Take it out, and their entire network collapses." "How can you possibly know that?" Thorne's voice crackled back, filled with awe. "Because I'm about to knock on their door," Vance replied. She hit a final key. "Pulse away." The effect was instantaneous. The remaining red on her map vanished as if a switch had been thrown. The jamming stopped. The screens on the wall flickered, and suddenly a single, clear image appeared. It was the last thing Sentinel-2 saw before it impacted the ground. A truck with a large antenna array on its roof, erupting into a ball of fire from a direct artillery hit. Static cleared from the radio channels. A voice, hoarse and strained, filled the talk. "Nightingale, this is Packhorse 6. Is anyone there?" "We read you, Packhorse 6, Thorne yelled, relief washing over him. "We read you. What is your status?" "Enemy is breaking contact. They're in full retreat. Your artillery. It was dead on. You saved us. How did you see them?" Thorne looked from his dead map to the speaker, then toward the signals tent. He didn't have an answer. He only knew that the quiet woman he had dismissed hours ago had just single-handedly turned a massacre into a victory. She had reached through the static and the chaos, and with nothing but numbers and code, she had pulled his soldiers back from the brink. The battle was over, but the questions were just beginning. An hour later, the battered remnants of the Packhorse convoy limped back through the gates of FOB Nightingale. The immediate danger had passed, leaving behind a heavy silence in the talk, thick with the smell of stale coffee and adrenaline. The holographic map was still active, but no one was looking at it. All eyes, from Colonel Thorne down to the lowest-ranking private, were fixed on the entrance to the signals tent, as if expecting some oracle to emerge. Thorne finally broke the silence. He walked with stiff, deliberate steps into the signals tent. Kalen and a few other staff officers followed at a respectful distance. Vance was still seated at the console, not celebrating, not resting, but methodically running diagnostics, patching the holes the enemy had torn in their network. The tent was quiet, save for the clicking of her keyboard. Chen and Diaz stood against the far wall, watching her with a reverence usually reserved for deities. The colonel stopped a few feet from her. He cleared his throat. "Specialist Vance." She did not look up. "The network is secure. I've uploaded new encryption protocols. This will not happen again." "I have no doubt," Thorne said, his voice softer now, stripped of its earlier arrogance. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "What you did, I've never seen anything like it. Who are you?" It was the same question Kalen had asked hours before, but the tone was worlds apart. The first had been a challenge, an insult. This was a plea, a genuine, desperate need to understand. Before Vance could answer, a secure comms line buzzed on the portable unit on Thorne's belt. The priority tone was one he had only heard a handful of times in his career. It was a direct link to CENTCOM headquarters. He fumbled to answer it, his hand shaking slightly. "Thorne here." "Colonel, this is General Marcus." A voice of pure, unadulterated authority boomed from the speaker, loud enough for everyone in the tent to hear. Report on the situation in Sector Gamma. My board shows a full C4I network collapse followed by a miraculous recovery. Explain. Thorne swallowed hard. General, we were ambushed, heavy EW assault. We were blind and deaf. We sustained casualties, but the convoy survived thanks to a specialist command sent us. She dismantled their entire electronic attack, single-handedly. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The general's voice, when it returned, was dangerously cold. Colonel, let me be perfectly clear. Command did not send you a specialist. We don't send tactical assets on auditing assignments. Another pause, this one even more chilling. You tell me right now, Colonel. Did you at any point interfere with Director Vance's work? The word hung in the air, heavy and solid. Director. Kalen, standing behind the colonel, went rigid. His face, already pale from the stress of the battle, turned the color of ash. He stared at the back of the Vance's head, his mind struggling to process the implications of that single title. Specialist, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, major, colonel, general, director. It was a title that existed outside the familiar hierarchy, on a plane of authority he couldn't comprehend. Director? Thorne stammered, his military composure finally cracking. Sir, I don't understand. Her paperwork identifies her as Specialist Ilara Vance, attached for system analysis. Her cover identifies her as a specialist colonel, the general snapped. So that arrogant field officers like you don't get spooked by her actual authority. Director Ilara Vance is the chief architect of the entire C4I platform you are currently using. She wrote the core code for the Sentinel drone's telemetry system when she was 25 years old. Her call sign, on the rare occasions she leaves her lab, is Oracle. Her authority on matters concerning that network in any tactical situation it touches is absolute. It supersedes yours. It supersedes mine. Now, I will ask you one more time. Did you interfere with her? Vance finally stopped typing. She slowly turned in her chair, her gaze sweeping over the dumbstruck faces of the men before her. Her expression was not one of triumph or vindication. It was simply one of weary patience, the look of a master craftsman who constantly has to explain her tools to amateurs. Thorne looked at Kalen, whose face was a mask of horror as the memory of his earlier mockery replayed in his mind. Lost, ma'am? The finance clerks are that way. Thorne found his voice, his words barely a whisper. No, General, we did not interfere. Good, the general said, because if you had, I'd be sending a helicopter to bring you back here in chains, and her back here to fix what you broke. Put her on. Thorne numbly held the comms unit out to Vance. She took it. Oracle here, she said, her voice calm and clear. Status, Oracle? The general asked, his tone now one of immense respect. The breach is contained, she reported. The enemy was using a new generation of Russian EW hardware. Clever, but flawed, they prioritize brute force over subtlety. I have the data, the network is patched, Nightingale is secure, my work here is done. Understood, the general replied. Transport is on its way. Well done, Director. The line went dead. Vance handed the unit back to the shell-shocked colonel. The tent was utterly silent. The chasm of rank and competence that had just opened up was too vast to comprehend. They hadn't just underestimated her. They had been children playing with matches in the presence of the god of fire. The sun had not yet risen, but a pale, bruised light was beginning to stain the eastern sky. The oppressive heat of the day was still just a threat, a memory held in the cooling dust. In the aftermath of the crisis, a new kind of order had settled over FOB Nightingale. It was a quiet, watchful order, centered entirely on the unassuming woman in the insignia-less uniform. Soldiers who had once smirked as she passed now fell silent and averted their eyes, their movements becoming self-conscious and respectful. They spoke of her in hushed tones, the story of the battle in the signals tent already taking on the quality of myth. They called her Oracle. Corporal Chen, his face etched with shame and awe, approached her as she stood by the repaired comms array, observing the final system checks. He held a steaming metal mug in his hands. He didn't speak until she turned her gaze to him. "Director," he mumbled, his eyes fixed on the ground. I brought you some coffee, and I'm sorry for, Vance looked at the mug, then at the young man's face. She saw genuine remorse there. She took the coffee without a word, her fingers brushing his. The simple act of acceptance felt like a pardon. Chen gave a shaky nod and practically fled. The most profound shift, however, came from Master Sergeant Kalen. He found her later as she was packing her small kit, preparing for her extraction. He walked into the now spotless signals tent, which Chen and Diaz had scrubbed clean as an act of penance. Kalen's usual swagger was gone. His posture was ramrod straight, his expression grim and formal. He stopped exactly 3 paces in front of her, his boots clicking together. He didn't speak. He simply raised his right hand to the brim of his patrol cap and executed the sharpest, most deeply felt salute of his 20-year career. It was more than a gesture of respect for a superior officer. It was an admission, an apology, a surrender of ego in the face of undeniable, terrifying competence. "Director," he said, his voice a low rasp, "my conduct was unprofessional and unacceptable. There is no excuse." Vance finished securing a strap on her bag. She looked up at him, her gray eyes assessing him not as a subordinate, but as a man. She saw the proud NCO, the warrior who had built his world on strength and observable reality, now grappling with a power he could not see or understand. The hardness in her eyes softened, replaced by something that might have been empathy. She gave him a single, crisp nod, a gesture of acknowledgement. "Your apology is noted, Sergeant." She picked up her bag. "Go see to your platoon. They performed well under fire. They'll need their leader for the debrief." She had not forgiven him, not exactly. Forgiveness was an emotional transaction she did not deal in. Instead, she had recontextualized him. She put him back in his box, not as a punishment but because it was where he belonged. He was a master sergeant, a leader of soldiers. She dismissed him to his duty, and in doing so, gave him back his purpose. He held the salute for a second longer, then lowered his arm, turned on his heel, and left without another word. Colonel Thorne was waiting for her by the landing pad. The sun was just beginning to crest the jagged peaks of the mountains surrounding the valley. "Director Vance," he began, The official AAR will state that FOB Nightingale's integrated defense systems, operated by your competent signals staff, successfully repelled a significant enemy electronic assault. She interrupted smoothly. "The details are classified. You held your ground, Colonel. That's all the report needs to say." She was giving him a gift, a way to save face, a way to maintain the integrity of his command. He understood this, and the knowledge of it humbled him more than any reprimand could have. "Thank you," he said simply. The words were heavy with everything he couldn't articulate. His shame, his gratitude, his awe. The distinct thumping of rotor blades grew louder as a sleek, black UH-60 Ghost Hawk, unmarked by any insignia, descended toward the pad. It was her ride. Vance started toward it, her data slate once again in her hand. As she walked across the packed earth, she passed Kalen's platoon, assembled for their morning equipment checks. They were cleaning rifles, inspecting gear, the mundane rituals of a soldier's life. As one, they stopped. At a silent signal from Kaelin, who stood at their head, every soldier dropped what they were doing and snapped to the position of attention. 30 hardened infantrymen, standing rigid as statues, their eyes locked forward, a silent, unified testament to the woman walking past. Elara Vance did not stop. She didn't offer a salute or a wave. She didn't need to. The respect was not for a rank they could see, but for a power they had felt. It was a force of nature that had passed through their small, violent world and set it right again. She stepped up into the waiting helicopter, the morning sun glinting off the dark screen of her data slate. The door slid shut, and the Ghost Hawk lifted into the sky, leaving FOB Nightingale behind in the quiet, clean light of a new day.